again, thank you for being here and accepting our invitation to come and have this conversation. I just want you to know that we have a pretty much timed agenda, so, if I start to look at you like this, we just want to wrap up the responses. But we are going to start with a set of core questions, and they're sort of written out, and several members will be asking those. So we'll apologize in advance for reading them, but they're the same questions we want to ask of every candidate. Before we get started, I'll ask each board member to introduce themselves so that you'll know who we are in the district and area of Nashville that we represent. We'll start with Amy.
I'm Amy Frog, and I represent District 9, which is the west side of Nashville. I represent Bellevue, Sylvan Park, Charlotte Park, Hillwood, and Westmead.
I'm Mary Pierce, and I represent District 8, which is also West Nashville. It's Green Hills, Bellmead, Oak Hill, 12 South area.
Thank you. Will Pinkston, I represent South and Southeast Nashville. I would say I represent the part of town where the airport is, but you probably didn't fly, you drove, I bet. But also, this is my district where we're sitting right now.
Okay, thank you.
Morning, my name is Anna Shepard. I represent District 4, which includes the communities of Hermitage, Donaldson, and Old Hickory. It's going out towards Wilson County.
Great.
Sharon, District 1, goes up to Jolton, through Whites Creek, all the way through North Nashville to along Clarksville Highway.
Great, thank you.
Elisa, I represent District 5, which is East Nashville, the Gulch, downtown.
Good morning. I'm Jill Spearing, and I represent District 3, which is the northeast part of Nashville, Madison, Inglewood, Goodlettsville.
And I'm Joanne Brannon, and I represent District 2. The Overton cluster is in my district.
Hi, I'm Thais Hunter. I represent District 6, and it's Antioch, Cane Ridge, Southeast Nashville.
Great, thank you.
So we will jump right in, and so we've got a packet of information about you, and each board member has had a chance to review that. What I would ask you to do is to take us up about 30,000 feet and give us sort of an overview of your experiences and why do you think you're qualified, or what actually interests you in coming here to Nashville.
Well, I was at an event held by Nashville Public Education Foundation last spring to talk about the work that we're doing in the Innovation Zone to turn around our lowest performing schools and work with kids and proving the possible. And what was so striking about that event were the vast array of stakeholders who were there, who were deeply engaged, who had very different views on education, but who were united that in order to be the kind of community that it aspires to be, Nashville needed a world-class public education system. And it's really because of that community dynamism and the opportunities that I think it portend that I'm excited to be a candidate in this process. And I've also mentioned in my materials that Nashville has been home base for me for more than 20 years. My grandfather moved here 25 years ago. My parents followed him shortly thereafter and have remained in Middle Tennessee. And I'm here all the time so that my two little boys can build a relationship with their grandparents. So this is a place that I very much see as home. So in terms of interest, those are the things that really attracted me to the position.
We have some prepared questions, so pardon me because I'm going to have to read this.
Of course.
74% of students in metro schools live at or below the poverty line. To support these students and families, MNPS offers wraparound services to students and families through Community Achieves, which is our community schools initiative. What is your opinion about the community schools approach, and what other ways of addressing poverty have you found successful?
Sure. Well, in our work in the Innovation Zone in Shelby County Schools, we have a number of different strategic approaches, but one of them is community support. Because we found, especially with children who are in our lowest performing schools, they're oftentimes the places where our communities are most in need as well. And so in Shelby County, we've partnered with communities in schools, and I know the approaches are similar, where communities in schools is helping us connect our kids to wraparound services so that they have all of their needs met, and so that parents have the information they need to help their children, whether it be mental health resources, whether it be vaccinations, et cetera. So my experience within the I-Zone has been such that I know that great teachers, great school leaders matter and are central, but we can't ignore poverty. I mean, poverty is a significant reason why our kids are struggling so much. And so I've seen that approach be effective, and it's the kind of thing that I would want to champion if selected as the next director.
Thank you.
Yes, talk, if you will, about your philosophy on human resources, talent recruitment, principal leadership, and development.
Sure. I think the central, most important factor in the lives of our children are our principals and our teachers. And I think about the three most important leadership roles in this or in any community are that of parent, teacher, and principal. And so for me, people is everything. And thinking again about our experience in the Innovation Zone, the reason we've been so successful is because we've been able to attract really great principals who in turn have attracted really great teachers. And my philosophy on being able to do that is that number one, you have to start with culture. You need to start with it, you need to reinforce it, and there's an approach taken by Denver Public Schools that I'm a big fan of, where you actually start with your teachers to help define and reinforce your culture, and then you need to include rituals and traditions so that you have a really vibrant culture. And in looking at some of the data for MNPS, I know that nearly half of our teachers are leaving the classroom because of reasons of culture. So I think you definitely have to start there, but that's not where you can end. And then from there, I would really focus on an approach, a book really influenced me called Drive, where it said people are attracted and engaged in workplaces where they have opportunities to have mission fulfillment, where they can master their jobs, and where they also have empowerment. And so around mission, I think we need to do a great job of reinforcing to our teachers that they have one of the most important leadership roles in the community around mastery. We need to ensure that we have best-in-class professional development. We need to empower our schools to do those things. And then finally, and I think that Nashville has already started to lead the way on this, figuring out a way to empower our educators. They're the closest to our kids. They have the greatest insight into what is going right and wrong, and they're going to be in the best position to make strategic decisions about how to move kids forward. And I think if you create a culture that's really affirming, and then you focus on those three things, you're going to, over time, attract a much higher quality workforce. And I have no doubt that Nashville has thousands of great teachers and incredible principals. But I think what I've read is that everyone's on the same page that we don't have enough, and that building more and more is part of the key, and I would say the central key to making sure we get where we want to go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Shelby County suffers from the same syndrome that plagues us sometimes as it relates to state policies. Even though we are, our two districts together represent or enroll 20% of the public school students in the state, we have a legislature and frankly an executive branch that just does not understand us and does not prioritize urban school system needs and underfunds us. So what, acknowledging that we have to deal with state policymakers whether we like it or not, what would be your approach in terms of interacting with the state capitol and the legislature?
Well, this is an area where I have some deal of experience. I worked with the legislature in Texas, and I worked with the legislature here in Tennessee when in my capacity with Teach for America. And my approach would really be driven by, where different policy and where specific investments could help us drive it forward, and making a very clear case and building coalitions around that. So it can't just be the members of the folks sitting around the table. It needs to be a larger community effort in order to get something accomplished. And I think another strength that I bring to the role is that I have a long history of raising money for school systems. And I think getting investments from a state capital is different, but it's the same kind of approach you'd want to take if that's what, if we wanted pre-K, if we wanted investments, greater investments for English language learners, or turnaround efforts, you'd want to craft a really strong case, build a coalition, and then be relentless in your follow-up. And that's part of what I've done in Shelby County Schools. We raised $14 million from private philanthropy to support key district initiatives. And I would take a similar kind of approach, but of course modify it for a large group of legislators and executive officials.
Even though Nashville continues to see growth in new residents with their children entering our school system, every cluster in our district loses about 40% of their students between the elementary and the middle tier. And we lose them to private schools or to surrounding counties. Now, besides marketing, which MNPS does actively, what strategies would you utilize in order to reverse this trend?
I want to just commend the board and the administration on doing what I think is actually a pretty central component of recruiting, which is going to a student-based allocation. Now that you've essentially gotten your principals into the game of recruitment, they know that the one kid through the door is going to be further investments for their school. I think you've now deputized the entire district to be really focused on recruitment efforts. And then from there, I think it's a matter of setting up clear strategic alignment. You need to have a goal. I led the district strategic planning process for Shelby County Schools, and one of our key priorities was to develop high-quality school options with the explicit goal of increasing market share. And that's the same kind of goal I imagine that you would need here in Metro Nashville Public Schools, where you're focused on market share. Every single school has specific goals around, recruitment, and that you're constantly looking at the data and going through a process where we're figuring out what is going to attract folks and keep them. And in my experience, and as a dad, what would attract and keep me are incredibly high-quality school options for my boys to go to. And so I think the structure here is set up to do that. I think you need to combine it with very clear performance management, as we've done in Shelby County. And then I think you need to constantly look at data and look for different strategic approaches based on what's working. So you have your high flyers who are going to really be able to bring in kids, and you're going to have folks who are not as successful. And I think you're going to then need to create an environment where there's best practice sharing amongst those folks, so we can figure out what the best practices would be to bring forward kids. But again, as a dad, you're looking for quality. And when I say quality, it's not just a narrow focus on test results. What I'm looking for, and my vision and mission for education is that it's far more comprehensive than that. We have a three-part mission in my view. One, of course, is around academic rigor. We need to prepare our kids to compete in an increasingly globalized world. We need to ensure that they're guarantors of our republic. And I think being involved in the civic life of our country and our communities is very important. And finally, the life of the mind and the civic life is very important, but the life of the spirit, music, art, PE. Those are the kinds of things I'm looking for my kids, and I suspect they're the same kinds of things that parents in Nashville are looking for as well.
How do you view the role of standardized testing in schools? How do you balance testing with efforts to educate the whole child, such as offering children access to arts, physical activity, recess, nature, and play?
Well, I think my view of one of the most important, if not the most important role of a director of schools is that you need to ensure that everyone's very clear on the mission. And when you narrowly define the mission as achievement on standardized tests, that's what everyone's going to focus on. So I think by having a broader mission, what I just stated, I think it's really three things. It's, of course, academic rigor, which you're going to be able to see based on the results of standardized tests. You're going to be able to, but you're also going to need to figure out a way to ensure that, public education was created because we have a republic, because we are all citizens, and we're all dependent on whether our country thrives or it doesn't. And so we need to ensure that that's a part of our mission. And then finally, I think the life of the spirit is very important. So physical education, music, PE, the Music Makes, in doing research, the Music Makes Us program is the kind of thing that should be part of the mission of any school system. So I care about accountability. I'm responsible for performance management and accountability within Shelby County Schools. But I think the vision for schooling needs to be much broader. And that's how I think, as a leader, you convey that message. We have a different mission, here it is. And then you reinforce constantly all three of those things and not just one.
All right.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit about your vision of central office, the role it plays, as well as you mentioned earlier about empowering your principals. What does that look like in your schools, and what would you see that for Nashville schools?
Sure. I think that my vision of how that should be is that the central office's role is to support schools, that every bit of decision-making power we can put into a principal and a teacher's hands, we should put in their hands, but that doesn't obviate our need to create best-in-class curriculum. So I would say our role is empowerment, if I were to come up with one phrase, empowerment. And empowerment does include giving decision rights to our principals and our teachers, but empowerment also means ensuring that people have the tools to do their jobs well. And so that's how we define it in the innovation zone. Of course, we don't use the word autonomy. because none of us are an island. We're part of an interconnected community. So we do have a perspective on curriculum. We do have a perspective on what we should see when we go into schools. We do have a perspective on literacy. But we also leave the final decisions up to our team. And I think if the community and the board really wanted to go down this path, it would be essentially a matter of looking at every function within the central office and deciding where decision rights and financial rights lay. And I know that the board was wrestling with this around literacy a few weeks back, and that's the kind of decision that would need to happen function by function. And sometimes you're going to say, yeah, the central office is the best, the most cost-effective way to get something done. But that would be my vision, is that we're pushing as much empowerment to the schools as possible, and not in isolation. It's because I think that over time, empowering your schools creates a much more dynamic and exciting workforce for teachers to want to be a part of, for principals to want to be a part of, and that's going to be key if we're going to continue to build a pool of great people that are going to serve our children.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So, talk to us about what a strong partnership between the superintendent and the board looks like to you.
Sure. Well, I think it's a governance team. I do not vote, obviously, but one thing that I've learned from our superintendent, Dorsey Hobson, is that this is a definite partnership. And the way to create a lasting partnership, in my opinion, is not only it's a commitment to building relationships, as evidenced by an ongoing commitment. So one of the things that I'd want to do is set up ongoing meetings weekly with the chair, at minimum bi-weekly meetings with each of the board members, so that we were constantly discussing and talking about the different issues and where we need to go as a system. I think initially it would probably look like a board retreat. So we got very clear on norms and expectations respectively, so that we were very clear on what each of us expected from one another. But at the end of the day, the board is the elected representatives of the community. And the way that our system is set up is that you all have the final say. And so, of course, I'd advocate for positions. And at the end of the day, if one of my recommendations wasn't accepted, I'd respond the same way that I'd want a member of my team to respond if we had a robust discussion. I decided to go a different way, which is you all are the elected representatives, and that I will support that decision to the hilt. So, again, it's a commitment to ongoing building of relationship that can only happen through clear structures and commitments and clear guidelines for each other. And I've read through all of the policy and executive expectations, and having not been on the ground, I don't know the degree to which you all feel like those are currently being met, or if there's work to do on those, and I think that'd be the place to start. And we've laid out, very clearly to the community what the relationship looks like. To what degree are we living into that? And I'm not in a position to say one way or another, but I think that's where I'd start.
Anyone else?
Okay, question. Just one quick question before
Sure.
I get to my real question. I saw that you, and I know you came from TFA, but what is your degree that you hold, and what year did you graduate, just out of curiosity?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in public policy, and I graduated in 2000.
Okay. So my real question is, there's been, a lot has been written about the, comparing the ASD in Memphis with the iZone, and the iZone is producing better results in the ASD. To what do you attribute those improved results?
I think it's a number of factors, starting with culture. I think some of the members of the board had an opportunity to come visit us, and we went through a very deliberate process. We knew what our mission was. We wanted to move schools from the bottom 5 to the top 25 in 5 years. But we knew we needed a very clear culture in order to do that. And so we went through a pretty long-term process of defining the values that we think were going to guide us. And then we've worked to really live into those values through monthly traditions, rituals, praise, reinforcement, all through up and down the chain. And I think when you have that as the foundation, and you have a clear strategic approach, which for us is guided by getting great people. We talked about communities and schools and wraparound services. That's a component. But I would say the reason we have been successful in the iZone is that we have attracted some of our district's very best principals into the iZone. And they in turn have attracted some of our very best teachers. And we've resourced it well. So we've given more time. So when you get some of your community's very best principals, and they bring the very best teachers, and you're giving those folks more time, and we have coaching supports as well, and we're having wraparound services, I think you can't help but get great results with kids. And I also have the honor of leading an amazing team of people. I mean, our central office staff, Dr. Sharon Griffin and others have been amazing leaders, and I think together we have really continued to push the needle. So I would say it's the people, it's the culture, it's the strategic approach that we're taking, and it comes down to great teachers and principals.
And I'm sorry, repeat that. Your goal was to move the bottom 5 to the
To the
top
top
25.
25%.
And how long did you give yourself to do that, and where are you on that continuum?
5 years, and we are not on track to do that.
Okay.
We've had really impressive gains. So we've more than doubled the rate of student learning in our first cohort of schools, so the initial group that we took on. We've more than doubled student learning in the second cohort, and we had really impressive gains, I think, in our first year with high schools. So 2 of our 3 high schools had nearly 10-point gains. But the entire state is improving as well. So in terms of percentile rank, we're not on pace to hit our goal, but the student learning that we've demonstrated is the kind of growth that I would want to see. And so not on track to hit goal, but have made some, I think, pretty remarkable gains nonetheless.
Mr. Leon, I see some data in here on what Shelby County statistics look like. Share with me and my colleagues what the data looks like around the I-zone, particularly.
Sure. Which data are you talking
Well,
about?
it's just,
Racial, ethnic?
tells total enrollment, number of schools, and,
Oh, okay.
EL population, things like that.
Sure. In the I-zone next year, we'll have 21 schools. We, nearly 100% of our children would have received free and reduced meals and are economically disadvantaged. Our English language learner population is pretty small. In fact, there's only 3 of our schools that have a significant English language learner population. It's well below 5% in the I-zone as a whole.
Okay, so what does your population look like demographically as far as, we are a plurality here in
Sure.
MNPS. What does the I-zone look like?
I'd say the I-zone is a total, and I didn't answer one of your questions. We have more than 10,000 kids. Next year, depending upon enrollment, we'll have about 12,000 kids in the I-zone. 97% are African American. We have a couple of white students and very few Latino students. In some of our schools, the ratio is getting up to 10%, but that's only in 3 of our 21 schools.
Yes, I hear you talk about culture a lot and the cultural changes that you've made. Can you tell us the similarities or differences and speak in definitive language? Tell us what that culture means. Like, what do you mean when you say culture or cultural changes? What changes have you had to make as it relates to culture with your parents, children, teachers, principals, et cetera?
Sure. I might take a wider district-wide view on that question because in leading our district strategic planning effort, we were aligned that the primary reason we wanted to do it was because we wanted to shift the culture of our district and shift the culture of our community. And so the way that I define culture are the norms, the routines, the behaviors that you're seeing consistently. And it's not what you espouse, it's what you see. So you go through the value setting process because you want to define a set of values that it's who you are at your best. But you can walk into any school and know the culture just by observing what's actually going on. And then if you were to go backwards and look at those things, you say, well, this is the culture of this place. So the strategic planning process with the district was an opportunity for us to shift the culture. First, starting with a culture where adults were accountable. I think one of the first times, if not the first time, I've been in Memphis for now 10 years. This was the first time that the district has said, these are the goals we're going to hit. We're going to ensure that 80% of our kids are college or career ready, that we're going to have 90% of our kids graduate on time, that 100% of our kids are going to enroll in a post-secondary opportunity, and the board embraced those goals. And so that right there shifted to a culture where we wanted to accomplish something really ambitious for children. And then the second part of the culture change was engaging the community. So I led that process, and we had focus groups, we had surveys, we had several town hall type of meetings where we got input from the community. Given these goals, how do we get there? And we got that input over time. So the commitment to community engagement and collaboration was another part of the cultural change that we wanted to make. And now as we're living that strategic plan, so a culture of accountability, a culture of community engagement, We also wanted to change the way we did business to a more goals-based management and continuous improvement approach. And that's one of the things that my team and I do, is that every department now has set goals. We go through a continuous improvement process called STAT to ensure that we're a culture of learning, that it's not a gotcha culture. You know, when we sit down and we look at graduation rates or we look at attendance or differences in suspensions, it's not about telling adults why they're bad. It's about figuring out a way to get better together. And so those are some of the specific things that I would say, you know, we attempted to do through the strategic planning process up to the point of implementation. Does that help?
Ms. Spear?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
I was part of the cadre that visited the iZone schools a few months ago. And during that opportunity, I went to a elementary school. And I saw some of the reading instruction, and I observed kids who were having difficulty working on computers. And I asked about what the plan was for those kids, and looked like it was all a computer program. So I'd like to know more about that. And the way it was organized too is that the scores from the computer program were posted on the wall so that everybody could see that. What is your thinking in terms of how you work with students who are having difficulty in reading at the elementary level?
Yeah. We'll answer first the question about the school you visited, Ford Road. I think it was the school that we went to. Part of the reason you probably saw technology being used at that level is that Ford Road is one of our blended learning sites. So I launched a pilot in 18 of our schools, some of which were iZone schools, some of which were district schools, where we were looking to transition, or at least pilot, a blended learning approach. So I think that's, to answer the question about why you would see technology going on in that way, it was likely because of the blended learning approach that we're taking in Ford Road. And then with respect to helping kids, read, especially at the elementary school level, I think what we're guided by pretty consistently is RTI squared. And I think one of our big challenges in the iZone especially is that, if you look on the state websites, there's a pyramid. Well, our pyramid is inverted. We have almost entirely Tier 3 kids in our iZone schools. And so the approach that we take, models the kind of best practices approach you would want to take. You want to first focus on good first teaching. You want to ensure that you have clear guidance around what great literacy instruction looks like in the classroom. You want to have a rubric to reinforce that when you go into the classroom. You want to make sure that you have aligned instructional materials. And then where I think we differ a little bit from what our district does is that we do let teachers and principals know that they are the final decision makers. So that answers a little bit about why you might have seen that kind of approach at Ford Road. Did I answer your question then, Ms. Spear?
Well, so are you saying that there are other, it's not just technology, because I left thinking that was only what the lowest performing kids were getting. They got classroom instruction and then they got work on the computer, and that was it. So is that incorrect thinking?
No, all kids at Ford Road, irrespective of where they would be on a Tier 1 to 3 scale, are getting the kind of intervention through blended learning. It wouldn't be just for kids who are the most struggling readers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So one of the myriad of challenges that we're dealing with here in Nashville right now is sort of this huge disparity in disciplinary data, where the recorded and documented infractions, as it were, are overwhelmingly among our African American male students. And so I would like to hear, is it similar to what's happening in Memphis, and what are some of the strategies that you are employing at various levels, whether it's parent, student, teacher, principal?
Sure. It is the same in Shelby County, and I did see that data in preparation for this. First, I'll talk about what we're doing within Shelby County on that, and my team, I think, is really taking the lead because attendance and suspensions we've put together in one of our STAT processes. So we bring together our student services team, our academics team, my team, to really look at the data and lay out very clear strategies. And most of our thinking has been guided by, PBIS, progressive, behavioral approach with our kids. And then we're looking at rising, great decreases. Like, where are we seeing the big decreases, and how are these folks implementing the PBIS approach differently than where we're having different challenges? And we're struggling our way through it, but we've had incredibly great reductions in the overall level of suspensions. We still have a gap, unfortunately. But beyond like the tactical approach of a stat, where you're looking at a set of data, you've set goals, you've created strategies, and you're working and constantly looking at that and holding people's feet to the fire to have a different kind of result. Again, I would start with culture. I mean, I think that, as someone who, I'm the only white member of our cabinet. And when you look at disparate discipline data, there is something with race, class, and privilege that goes along with seeing those different kinds of numbers. And you can see some of the same things when you look at the overall district population with respect to, and when you have 70% of your kids who are kids of color and more than 70% of your staff that's white, it makes me wonder whether we have the culture of inclusivity here that you would really need to move the needle on the suspension numbers, or to attract a more diverse workforce, or to keep great people. So I don't know all the reasons for that, and I can't speculate without really digging in and knowing. But of course, I'd employ tactics like we have in Shelby County. But more importantly, like, what is our culture here that is leading to some of those numbers, and what do we need to do to fix it?
So currently your role is Chief of Strategy and Innovation, correct?
That's right.
So one of the things that has been mentioned a lot among our board members is around this challenge in sort of making the difficult decisions. So help me understand what your role is with regards to budgeting for the district, and then, if you've ever had to make whether it's a drastic cut, and how did you communicate that? What was the strategy, and how did you sort of fill the gap?
Yeah. So this is my third budget cycle with Shelby County Schools. And in the previous two budget cycles, we've cut near $200 million. And this year, it looks like $86 million. And I think we've been using fund balance, but our fund balance is starting to drain. And in a couple of years, there won't be any fund balance left. And of course, I'm responsible directly for my 7 teams and their budgets, and all of the I-Zone schools and their budgets. But we've taken a real team approach to really wrestling with these issues. And I think the key is you got to start early. You can't communicate well if you don't start early and have a long runway. And then you need to communicate out the kinds of choices that you are being forced to make given the severe budget pressures that we're on within Shelby County. And surprise, surprise, nobody likes that. Nobody likes that you're going to cut from the I-Zone. We're going to cut 7 reading teachers from the I-Zone. Nobody likes that we're going to cut our CLU program. And these are things we've put back into our budget, but we've had to offer up different things that are also painful cuts. And so I think it's about helping the community understand why we're in this position, what we've done over time to ensure that we aren't making these tough decisions year on year, and what we're going to do moving forward. And frankly, what we're going to do moving forward, and our superintendent has talked about this, we're going to have to close a lot more schools. And we're going to have to get far more efficient as a district. And he signaled that a couple of months ago, because we're going to have to start making very tough decisions in September. So we want to make sure there's a long runway. And I've been a part of the senior cabinet team that's wrestled with these difficult decisions every step of the way, including, I'm sure has been in the news recently, additional closures and revocations of low-performing charter schools.
Follow up to that question, can you just talk about I think I have a good understanding of what's going on in Shelby County, but can you talk about the environmental conditions that have led to those budget pressures that you're talking about, and,
Sure.
and kind of paint a picture for folks who might be watching about what's going on?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I mean, I think the most significant change in the landscape in Shelby County is the percentage of kids who are in either the ASD or in district authorized charter schools. So I think I'm going to get my numbers a little bit wrong here, and I can follow up with the exact data because our charter report has not yet come out, but it will shortly. I think it was 2009, there were 2,000 kids in charter seats, and today that number is over 20,000. So in a very short window, a lot more charter seats, which of course puts pressure on the district to be more economical. I think another component is that we have a high number of significantly under-enrolled schools. And so and those are very painful decisions. I mean, Carver alone, it's a historically important high school in Memphis, and it's being considered for closure because we have 150 students in a school that was built for nearly 2,000. So we have situations like that all over the community where we're gonna have to make tough decisions to consolidate schools. So in terms of landscape factors, those are two, and I think the third, which is different than Nashville, is that not only are we losing student population from the district, but overall Shelby County is not gaining population, it's losing population. And therefore your entire tax base is a lot lower. So a combination of those three factors, I think, are contributing to the financial position we're in.
To kind of stay on that thread, what metrics are you all using to make those determinations? I know Nashville uses the academic performance framework, just to even kind of measure our overall school success. Do you all have a similar metric that helps guide those difficult decisions?
We have a draft, and I don't know if this was in the media, but our board, my team worked on a charter schools compact, and the board took it from there, and now they're still working with it. And a component of that compact is a school performance framework. So we have a draft of a school performance framework, but we want to make sure that there's lots of engagement with our district principals, our charter school principals, with the community as a whole, to really understand this tool. So we're still going through that process. So in reviewing revocation decisions this year for the charter school sector, we looked at any school that was in the bottom 10%, any school that had less than a 4 TBOS, and any school that had been open for at least 3 years. And the schools that we most recently revoked had been open a minimum of 5 years, up to 14 years being open. So without the school performance framework, we're trying to use a combination of different data, but the intention is over time, once the board has approved it, to say our school performance framework is how we're going to make these decisions.
Is that for district schools as well?
As well, yeah.
You mentioned a couple of times in previous responses this phrase, I wrote it down, traditions and rituals. Give us an example of some of those.
Sure. One tradition is that my team takes nominations for someone who really exemplified our core values during the course of that month. And if we've bought a very nice glass award that we give to that person every single month. But I think, and that's a tradition. But I think the tradition that is most affirming is that I will literally read every single nomination that I got. And especially the work of the central office, like people can get lost. And when you get shouted out by one of your teammates for exemplifying one of the values that we've defined, there's lots of applause, there's lots of cheering, people are very excited. So that's an example of the kind of tradition or ritual that you would put into place, among many other things, to ensure that you were reinforcing the values, but you're also just recognizing the great work of people who were working on behalf of children.
So, as a Tennessean, Brad, you've got unique perspective on what's happened here over the last decade in particular, and I would just like to hear your thoughts on where we were as a state, kind of where we are and where we need to go, and then there's a specific question that I bet you've given some thought to, which is. In 2013, Tennessee became the fastest improving state in the history of the nation's report card. Yes. Right? So what caused that, in your opinion, as somebody who's been observing this and participating in it for a number of years? And then what strategies do you think we need to double down on going forward? We as in the collective we.
Sure. Well, the landscape changed so much between, the end of Governor Bredeson's administration and then Governor Haslam's administration. I think about the world prior where, I was supporting and coaching teachers, and the teachers would potentially get an observation or an evaluation from their their administration maybe once in a year. And if you look at the averages, folks were getting evaluated once every 5 years. And evaluation is very tricky because it has the real, some can take it as real accountability. But the way that I look at it is it's coaching and support for teachers. At its best, it's coaching and support for teachers. So the fact that statewide we started doing that, I think made a big difference in the opportunities that teachers were getting for coaching and feedback. And that's certainly the spirit we take it in the iZone, is that our coaches are no-fault coaches. Like, no one's gonna fire you or anything like that. They're gonna get in there and try and support you. So I think statewide, when you do that, you're going to get better performance because coaching needs to be a part of anyone's job. I think moving forward, as our populations, especially in urban areas, diversifies, there needs to be significantly more investment for English language learners. I think that if we're serious, and I know that the commissioner is serious about early reading, kids reading to learn by 3rd grade, there's got to be significant investments in pre-K. There's no way, especially in places like Memphis and Nashville, that you're going to get to complete proficiency in reading by 3rd grade unless you're investing in pre-K. And I think the other thing that I'd focus on, at least at a system level, is when the Vanderbilt study came out and said pre-K is great, makes a difference, but it dissipates over time. What I took from that is, well, perhaps we need to focus on K-2. Like, we need to strengthen our K-2, less that pre-K was a problem. So I could probably go on and on the different kinds of changes that I'd want to see at the state level, but investments in English language learners, investments in pre-K, continuing a focus on coaching and support for teachers, I think would be big things that I would focus on.
What does the pay structure look like for your teachers in the iZone?
The pay structure is the same as the district standard, but because they're working an additional hour, they get compensated for the additional hour. And the additional hour is the equivalent of 23 additional days over the course of a school year. So the teachers in the iZone are essentially getting more than a month's worth of additional salary to be there, which is part of how we've attracted folks. There's also signing and retention bonuses. Those are more nominal. They're about $1,000, but of course they make a difference. And so the pay is different, and the hours are also different. But it's the standard pay scale with enhancements based upon working the extra time.
Okay. So we included in some of the information that we provided to you a copy of our strategic plan.
Yeah.
So a little feedback. What would you do to strengthen it? Nothing to be held to, but just as a cursory overview of it.
One thing jumped out at me, and this may not be the only thing that I would focus on, but the one thing that jumped out at me is in researching for this position, there are a lot of concerns about equity. And I didn't see anything in the strategic plan that dealt with issues of equity, whether it be access to AP courses or differential suspension rates, or, and in fact, if you look at the academic performance framework, which I think is incredibly strong, issues of equity are 5%. So if as a system that's something that we care about, and I think we should, and I have heard this board and the community say we should care about that, then it needs to be a more prominent component of whatever strategic plan that we're putting together. I very much admire the focus on empowerment. I very much admire the focus on personalized learning. I need to learn more about what exactly is meant by personalized learning, because obviously I'm responsible for the virtual school, and it means something very specific there that we're tailoring around the needs of one child. We're using technology in a lot of different approaches, but those were some initial impressions. I think the goals are incredibly robust, and I do have a question for the board if we get to that stage about, with all the changes in TN Ready, how you're thinking about the accountability, because there are clear goals in that plan. I think that's also great, but the standards have shifted, the accountability has shifted, and we won't get data back for quite some time on those kinds of things. So again, issues of equity stood out as I didn't see anything there. I looked at the academic performance framework, great, but issues of equity were also a small component of that, and that's really what I took away.
Mr. Leon, thank you for being here this morning with us. We really do appreciate that. We've learned a lot about you this morning. Is there anything that you did not get to share with us, or do you have any questions of me or any of my colleagues?
Well, if I may just share a little bit of for the personal reasons why this work is so personal to me, and I do have questions, but one of my earliest memories as a kid was getting coached by my parents on how to talk to bill collectors when they called my home. You know, my parents are incredible role models, but they face a lot of challenges. They had me when they were young. My mom was a teenager. Neither of my parents went to college, and as a kid, you know, I was a firsthand witness to their struggle, their shame, their desire for a better life for my brothers and sisters and I. And, you know, as a result of those experiences and some of my early experiences as an educator, I made a choice that I was going to work and serve on behalf of kids and families that face the longest odds and the steepest climb, that I would do everything that was in my power to make sure that our country lives up to its aspirations, not just for the kids born into better circumstances, but for every single one of our children. And throughout my entire career, I have served our most economically disadvantaged kids, and what I know is that the challenges that I faced as a kid pale in comparison to what our kids are facing. And what I also know is that the only path for them to a better life is through a good education. And I know also that Nashville's only path to be the community that it aspires to be is through a great education. And I'd also want you to know that I wake up every single morning now with a sense of urgency and on a mission to make our kids' lives better. That's the same approach I would bring here, and we would do it together, and we do it together as a team. So with that, I do have a couple of more questions, if that's okay. I'd actually love to hear from the board the same question I got. What steps would you want to put in place to make sure that this was a high-performance governance team once you've selected a new director?
Well, you said it, and Dr. Gentry has said it before, it is a sense of urgency. I mean, we need someone that will move the needle quickly, especially for our children who are our high needs children in whatever respect they're a high need, whether it be educationally or economically or, you know, in any of those areas. So it is a sense of urgency.
Anyone else?
And we want to be able to reach all children. And so we want to pay special attention to all areas of special education, students, the EL students, the gifted students. I haven't spoken about them today, but we want them to be challenged and to move forward. Many times we hear from parents that we don't reach those students and motivate them and push them to the levels that they need to be moving toward. So for all students, the turnaround students' needs are being met, and that the gifted and special ed, those who have a lot of needs in terms of discipline, and those who have a lot of needs in terms of their nurturing. So.
Go ahead. Amy and Will are like trying to.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought he was starting. I was listening.
Go ahead.
Would you say something? I think you hit on a couple of points. The equity issue is a key issue here, in a variety of ways, as you said, even with some of the gifted programs. But what struck me about what you said about the work of the iZone, I think is a key piece that we're trying to develop here, which is getting the wraparound services in place, because we do have such a high poverty population, and we have children that are simply not coming to school ready to learn. And I mean, as we all know, poverty has a huge impact on children, and with that comes trauma, because children that are in very high poverty situations come to school with trauma. So I would like to see us get those sorts of supports in place so that the children are ready to learn, so that when we have great principals and great teachers, they can move them forward.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I, as a preschool graduate, I agree with the idea of doubling down on early childhood education if we're going to reach a place of reading at grade level by third grade. You asked a question. I think I heard the word governance in there, and I'll just tell you that we've been very focused on this search and getting to this point. But there's still a lot of work that has to be done among the 9 of us to professionalize our own operations and create an environment where we are really monitoring and looking for success, and kind of what do those routines and systems look like that don't really exist right now in a meaningful way. So we've got, as a board, got a lot of work left to do with the next person. So that's something we'll have to pivot to quickly to make sure we're serving the entire organization well.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I was just going to say with that governance, making sure that, we just maybe as a board, along with our new director, revisit our strategic plan, kind of make sure we're fully supportive and in line with what we've set forth. Was it almost 5 years ago that was passed. But then also, as Will mentioned, making sure that we're aware of our policies and then we have our systems in place and that we're operating at that level as a board instead of in other places that get in the way of student achievement.
Anybody else? Okay.
So I think the question was, what are we looking for? I would say, as I said before, we're looking for a very strong leader. We're looking for someone who can mentor and someone who has a sense of urgency, which all of our board members have said. And we're looking for someone like you that shows passion for their current school district. My only question would be, and you don't have to answer this question, is do you have a successor? Do you have someone who can do the work when and if you leave? That's all. You don't have to answer.
Okay.
Anybody else? Again, thank you for being here this morning, Ms. Blair.
Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.